Thank you for having me here today. It's a privilege to speak with you. And as Pablo said, I'm going to talk to you about smart giving. At the previous Skepticamps, a couple years ago, I talked to you about why we should be helping people in general, especially those in extreme poverty, inspired by Peter Singer's book, Life You Can Save. This talk kind of takes it for granted, or assumes that you already want to donate, you already want to give in some way, and we're going to talk about smarter ways to do that. The talk is inspired by mainly the work of Dean Carlin, who wrote the book on the left, More Than Good Intentions, as well as Banerjee and Duflo, the book on the right. And these are, I guess, behavioral economists who really try to use reason and evidence to find out what works. They have different poverty action labs, which they use the research to communicate different ideas to different charities, as well as evaluate different interventions. But it really is what works. It's not enough just to say, well, we tried this intervention, and then people got better, or something changed. Well, how do you know they would have gotten better anyway? Correlation is not equal to causation, right? A brief outline. I'll start with a general key message, then provide about 5 smart giving tips, and then finally a bit of theory and practice. The key message: start with your heart. When we hear about tragedies in this world, a famine perhaps, or see photos like this, we end up feeling perhaps something like sadness, frustration, anxiety, even anger. And this is because we care. That's partly what caring is. And so we start from that point of compassion and use that to inspire action. So not just random action, because you start with your heart, but you should give with your head. And I can give you 2 examples to see what I mean. Many of us, especially around Christmas time, say bring some food to the food bank. Seems like a good thing. Bring food to the hungry. What would be the problem with that? Well, there was a couple issues with this. That when you go to the store and you spend $2 buying some food, it turns out that a food bank can often buy food at a much reduced rate compared to you. Bulk volumes, discounts, and whatnot. So they might be able to get food for 5 to 10 times less than you do. So it doesn't make sense for you to give them the food. You should give them the money. As well, the idea of buying a can at a store, bringing it home, then taking it to your community center or your church, and then from there it goes to the food bank, and then it has to be sorted and to see if it's useful or not, is not the most efficient way to do things. So it's a good idea to help people who are hungry, but they don't need food. They need money. This is a smarter way of doing things. Another example is barriers to education in India. Carolyn Faines talked about this in rural India, Tamil Nadu, talking about different barriers for children being educated in India. And there were several, some of which were just transportation, getting a child from where they live to the school. Another issue was school uniforms. Couldn't afford them, so they were actually staying home and not going. One other issue was that sometimes the child had to work in the field, or even help a sibling or a relative, and therefore they couldn't go to school. And still yet another reason was suffering from some sort of sickness. Intestinal worms was one of the big ones, and that's debilitating enough to preclude children from going to school. So if your goal was to get children to go to school, how would you do this? Well, you could try to attack these problems in different ways, right? You could provide a cash transfer to the parents, so they wouldn't need the child at home to offset that. And that, apparently, in this particular example, costs about $1,000. That you could transfer $1,000 and then the child can go to school for a year. That sounds good. You could also go the uniform route. $1,000 would buy maybe about 10 uniforms. Okay? But if you go the deworming route, which apparently only costs about $40 a child, now for that same $1,000, 25 children can go to school. So one intervention turns out to be 25 times more effective than another. And this is where it's a statement that's obvious but needs to be said, that not all actions, programs, or interventions are equal. And in a way, not all charities are going to be equal either. All of the things being equal, if you have 2 very efficient charities and one is doing cash transfers for this program and one is doing deworming, one is just going to be about 25 times more effective. And that segues to the smart tip. Number 1. Ask yourself how much good is being generated for every dollar I give. That's the main thing. What does my donation do? You should be asking this to yourself and to your charity. And you should ask them tough questions if they can't answer. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Now, a lot of people might use administration costs as a heuristic. And this might make sense only in a gross sense, like if they're 25 or 30%. But when it gets down to smaller numbers, it's not the best metric. And the reasoning is that you should be mainly focused on what does your money do. As Dean Carlin gave an example, that there could be 2 different approaches, 2 different business models to achieving the same goods. So say you want to provide, say, clean water, and one organization tries to create new wells, and another one is trying to clean existing water sources. It shouldn't really be your concern who spends more on copier toner, or maybe even some legal administration costs. What you want to know is, for your donation, who gets access to more water? As a sign. So that's one example, as well as a lot of the organizations which are better, more rigorous, they use some of the administration costs to do research on their own programs to show that it worked. So it shouldn't be discounted just because of that. It's a factor, but not the real end. The second example is that some of the financial categories are fluid. So what's going to count as fundraising versus some sort of advertising versus administration versus research, it may be a bit fluid. So 7% versus 9% versus 10%, it may not matter that much. But of course the main thing is focus on effectiveness, not just what looks or feels good. Obviously, what looks or feels good is kind of what motivates you in the first place. Your heart is suffering and you want to alleviate that, you want to do something that feels good, but what is effective? And as I mentioned to researchers before, the idea of rigor and evidence and using something like a randomized control trial. So those in the science world know this extensively. A good example is when, say, drug companies are testing something, you can't just say, well, we gave this drug to these people and then they felt better. Like, well, where's your control group? How do you know they would have gotten better anyway? So it's using that kind of methodology, that kind of thinking, and hopefully a good charity has research publications or something to back up what they've done and how it actually works and if it actually did anything. So really it's how much good is generated for every dollar you give. Number two, don't restrict your donation. Now, we know that charities often promote the option of you giving to a specific region, a specific cause, a specific project, or even a specific good, like a goat. And that's nice, because it's understandable, it's tangible. But the problem is, it restricts what they can do with their money. It literally is, you're targeting, therefore you're restricting. And it could be that something changes over the year, or it could just be that the different programs have different importance, and it's much better to have the charity have the ability to direct your donation wherever it's needed the most. So if you're already trusting them with your money, because they do this is their job, they research things, they provide programs and services, it makes sense to let them do what they can with their money. So don't restrict it in that sense. And yes, on some level I'm saying, I'm going to trade that feeling of intangibility for hopefully a different, but more important, satisfaction of increased impact or effectiveness. Tip number three is to focus on only a few charities. We've heard many expressions, it's the colloquial expressions. Diversify your portfolio, you've got to spread the wealth. But every time you donate to charity, there's a cost, there's a transaction cost. I don't just mean because the credit card, say, skims 2 or 3% off the top, but because someone has to process that financial transaction. It's either going to cost them a little bit financially, or because they have to communicate with donors in some way, the charity has some expense every time you donate. So if you're donating to 15 different charities, that's 15 different transaction costs. Now, some charities, if you're donating monthly, they prefer that, even though it could be increased cost, you have to check with them, because then they can plan their program. So you don't just want to check with the charity, depending on which way you want to go. But in general, if you're donating to 15 charities, as I said before, they're not all equal. It's very unlikely they're all going to be equally as effective. So it could be that 13th charity that gets your dollar is taking away $1 from the best charity, which is going to do more with your money. So if you were trying to use reason and evidence to do the most for your money, you would donate to the best charity, or even just a few. As for number four, help you help you. So this is helping yourself to achieve your goals. We've all been in situations, or at least most of us, where we're trying to achieve a goal, perhaps eating better, exercising, losing weight, something like that, where we sincerely want to achieve it, but we find it difficult, and we don't quite achieve the goal we want. And we know there are different ways to put in place, or mechanisms, to help us achieve these goals. And one of them, regarding charitable donations, could be to have an automatic monthly deduction from your paycheck. And that way the money is already taken in, the goal is taken care of before you do anything else. It could also be perhaps a monthly credit card charge. Another option is to use, maybe a social event. So you have a group of friends together, you talk about it, you decide what you're going to do, and then you mutually reinforce each other to achieve these goals and provide support. And we also know that public commitments make it so people are more likely to follow their own goals and achieve them. Those who feel very financially constrained, you could try to strategically sacrifice some small discretionary item. So if you're saying buying coffee twice a week, maybe it's once a week, and you try to direct that money, and it adds up over time. Just trying to think of all the different ways you can help yourself. As for the last tip, number 5, this is how is this charity ranked? There are several charity ranking or evaluating websites or organizations out there. Charity Navigator is one of them. It's gotten better over the past couple of years. But I would say the best one is GiveWell, givewell.org. And they spend a lot of time and extensive research looking into charities, demonstrating whether they do what they say they do or do not. In fact, they reject about 98% of the charities they look at, simply because they can't prove to demonstration or research that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. They might be, but again, correlation is not causation, so how do you know if they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing? Now, we don't usually support deference to authority, and I generally don't either, but if you feel pressed for time and or you just don't have the energy or resources to put into it, you might consider trusting the favorite philanthropist. If you happen to like what Bill Gates is doing, give to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you think Peter Singer is great, just follow what he's doing. But I would say givewell.org. So those are the tips. And smart giving in theory, I said that we should be helping people, especially those in extreme poverty, that we should use reason and evidence regarding if things work, if they don't, to determine effectiveness. That you should not restrict your donation, just donate to a few charities, perhaps even just one. There's different ways to help yourself, helping others, socially, automatic deductions, making a public commitment, and also using charity dollars, like GiveWell. So that's the theory. What about in practice? Well, in practice, I think that means donating to the Against Malaria Foundation. We actually give you something to take away here. And for those who don't know, malaria is a very debilitating disease. It affects hundreds of millions of people each year through illness. It has a huge economic impact. It's mainly caused through the transmission, mainly caused by mosquitoes biting people. So if you were able to protect yourself from being bitten by, saying, sleeping under a bed net, which is treated with insecticide, which kills mosquitoes, you're less likely to get malaria. This is a proven intervention. It works, and for just $4 or $5, you can buy a bed net, and people are less likely to get malaria. And why this organization is so good, is they actually have zero administration costs. And that sounds odd, but how could that be? Well, their salaries of just the 2 or 3 people that work there are covered by private donations. And then they partner with other organizations to distribute the nets. And many, many people do a lot of pro bono work. So really, it's fine at zero. And they're very cost-effective, rigorous, and transparent. There's lots of information on the website about what they do, how they do it. There's photos of the nets actually being distributed. They do surveys to make sure people get nets and not more than they should. And even making sure, like, say, someone else who's selling nets, their business isn't hurt by them giving away free nets. Because, as you know, things are very, very complicated, and good intentions often go wrong. And they were GiveWell's #1 ranked charity because of it. So I just encourage you to look into this, and that's a recommendation there. So that's practice, but still theory. What about real practice? Well, I'll publicly commit to you that if you donate to this charity, I will match your donation. So that's my walk in the talk there. If you take all that I've said, I've looked at this for years and researched it, this is, I think, the best charity on earth for this moment, and I will match your donation if you choose to donate. Thank you for listening, and as I said, start with your heart, give with your head. Time for questions.
2 minutes. There's time for someone to ask a question.
We started 5 minutes late though. All right, we got a schedule. Any questions? Very quickly. Yes?
Do you know any websites that track charities doing things you may not necessarily agree with, like Salvation Army giving $20 to $50 million to fight gay rights initiatives in the U.S. or?
That Salvation Army may be within something like the Charity Navigator, or whether it's going to track certain, I guess, ideological stances. That's something you have to go into sort of. Yes, John?
So if I want to go with your scheme of donating to Against Malaria, and I want you to match it, how does this work? Like email you or what?
Actually, if you follow, oh, it took it away. Yeah, you can so Darren at trcpodcast.com, or before there was a tiny URL at the bottom, which will link you to a website, and from there you can go directly donate to the charity itself. I've set it up so you're not really going through me. There are 2 pages on the charity itself. So the Against the Malaria Foundation has fundraising pages. You donate to one of them, you see your donation there, I see it, and on a different page, I donate. So you can make sure that I'm actually following, and at the moment I've already put in several $1,000s as a sign of goodwill. Oh yes, at the bottom there. So yeah, reducesuffering.weebly.com. Thank you.